Welcome to National Parks Traveler, where we explore the national parks and the issues that involve them.
Summer is almost here. The upcoming Memorial Day weekend is the official kickoff to the summer travel season, and I'm happy to say the National Parks Traveler will be continuing to bring you news about the parks and how you can enjoy them. This is Kurt Repanshek, your host at The Traveler. As much as I was looking forward to retiring, your support has enabled the news organization to continue on with its editorially independent coverage of national parks and protected areas. My colleague Lynn and I will be discussing this good news this week, as well as exploring some of the new content we will be bringing you in the months ahead and looking out across the national park system concerning some recent news events. I'll be back in a minute with Lynn.
The Blue Ridge Parkway Foundation is the primary nonprofit fundraising partner for the Blue Ridge Parkway. It is made up of people who have a deep love for this majestic road and want to ensure that its natural beauty and the experiences it offers endure for generations to come. Show your appreciation at brpfoundation.org. Smokey's Life. Full of stunning photography and thought-provoking reads, Smokey's Life Journal is a biannual magazine produced by Smokey's Life, formerly the Great Smoky Mountains Association. Members receive it free of charge each spring and fall, and it is available for purchase in retail stores throughout Great Smoky Mountains National Park and online at smokieslife.org. Listener and reader support make the National Parks Traveler possible every day of the year. If you enjoy the Traveler's content, please consider a donation at nationalparkstraveler.org.
Hey Lynn, how are you?
I'm good. Hi, Kurt. How are you doing?
Aside from a late winter, early spring cold, I'm doing fairly well.
Well, great. Well, I always like to know what the temperature is there in Park City, Utah. San Antonio, we're going to hit 90 today. So how about you?
That's horrible. Why don't you move? Right now, it's a wonderful 62 degrees. We've had some beautiful spring days the past few weeks. Yesterday it got up to, almost 67 or 68. It's just ideal. And if I could, I would keep it that temperature all summer long because don't like the heat that much.
A lot of times when we talk, it's actually snowing there or it just had snowed. So at least you don't have to contend with that right now.
Not right now, but it is still only May, and when our boys were growing up here, the Park City High School would have its graduation usually the first weekend in June, around 6th or 7th of June, and it wasn't unusual to get a snowstorm for graduation. So we're not out of the woods yet. But climate change is taking hold, unfortunately, and it's a little warmer than I'd like this time of year, but it's okay. It's a beautiful weather. And, I don't know, Texas, 90 degrees in May, and it can only get warmer, right?
Right, and it will.
And you've had some severe weather. I don't know if it hit San Antonio, but I saw where Houston, some downpours, maybe some tornadoes. Is that normal?
Yeah, it missed us, but there was a lot of bad damaging weather in East Texas.
Wow. Well, we're not here to give you the weather report. We're here to talk about national parks and National Parks Traveler.
Yeah, Kurt, I understand that you'd like to extend some thank yous out there to our listeners and readers.
I'm not sure if it's thank yous or grumpiness because, every time I try and retire, Lynn, the readers and listeners step up. And, originally I was going to bring an end to the Traveler at the end of last year, December 31st. And in a short period of 6 weeks, there was a great response, a great outpouring of love, if you will, and donations that made it sufficient for the Traveler. At the time, I was thinking, well, we'll get through June 2024. And then the folks at National Parks Conservation Association decided to do a piece on the Traveler in their magazine, in National Parks Magazine. And that came out in late March. And I was kind of concerned that, well, that's just, 90 days or so away from my June deadline. And again, there was a phenomenal outpouring of support for the Traveler, so much so that we'll easily make it through this year financially, and it gives us some additional time to seek additional, more reliable funding underwriting to guarantee that the traveler will continue for years to come.
Well, that's great news, and I'm happy to hear it. And I know I'm biased because I like to do podcasts for this platform, and I also am an old friend of yours. But I know that there's a lot of people that appreciate what the kind of coverage that the National Parks Traveler does about the national parks and all the issues, big, small, weird and interesting, and fun and irreverent. So thank you so much.
And it really is interesting. I've long said I don't understand why nobody else has tried to duplicate the Traveler because there is such interest in it. I mean, we're seeing 2 million plus readers and listeners a year, and it just goes to underscore how much people want to know about the national parks and what's going on. And yes, there's a lot of people who are really kind of national park junkies and want to know about how the parks are being managed and what the Park Service is up to. But there's also a lot of people who just love to learn about different national parks, whether it's Yellowstone or Little River Canyon National Preserve in Alabama. And it's great. It's really heartening because I grew up loving the national parks, and it's great to see being able to connect a lot of people across the world, literally, with the national parks.
And I understand that's actually going to expand a little bit with some more international coverage that you're going to be offering.
I've long looked at the Traveler as having global possibilities because there are national parks and protected areas the world over that are so amazing, that deserve coverage, whether it's exploration of these unique lands or wildlife watching, but also parks that have issues, troubles that need to be addressed and raised in the public eye. Some years ago, my wife and I went to Belize for a vacation, but being a writer, I never really truly vacation. And we went to Chiquibu National Park in Belize and discovered that it's a beautiful, wild park, and it holds a lot of history, prehistory in Mayan ruins, but it also faced pressure from people coming into the park and actually stealing wildlife that they could sell to pet zoos, the pet trade, cutting down the forest for creating small farms, subsistence farms, even gold mining. And Belize is one of those countries that doesn't have a national park service like the United States National Park Service, and I don't think many countries have a park service like the United States is fortunate enough to have. And so I've always kind of looked at there are so many national parks around the world that deserve coverage. And so when we got this boost in funding, I figured to see what we could find out there across the world. And there's this one travel writers website that I'm a member of, and I just put a pitch out there. I said, hey, we're looking for journalists who are familiar with national parks anywhere in the world, who can write both hard news about the national parks as well as soft news, as it were, and soft news being travel pieces, how to enjoy this park. And I just put this pitch out the other day, and within 12 hours, we'd received more than 60 pitches from all over the world. I mean, somebody in France wants to pitch a story about, I think it's Mercantour National Park, which has the largest alpine lake, the highest paved mountain pass, and some of the oldest and most prolific prehistoric rock etchings in Europe. There are hiking trails there. There are ruins of military camps. There's a large variety of animal life, including wolves, that have been reintroduced into the national park. Somebody else wanted to pitch a story from Scotland on the John Muir Way. I mean, everybody associates John Muir with the United States National Park movement. And of course, John Muir, if you know anything about him, was from Scotland. And in Scotland, they have created this John Muir Way, which celebrates him. and apparently it's a 134-mile-long traverse of Scotland, from his place in Dunbar to Helensburgh. And it shows how Scotland is facing up to environmental concerns by protecting natural landscapes and building new futures from the industrial past. And the pitches are still pouring in. I mean, we've had pitches from Ghana, from Japan, from Germany, Australia, Kyrgyzstan, Mexico, and Brazil. And that's not to say that those stories are going to take over the Traveler and push out the coverage that we've come to be known for over the past 19 years, but rather to supplement it and to provide maybe an armchair read, or to alert the readers to someplace they never even heard of before that might be a great place to go visit.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Absolutely. Now that we're talking about that, I was actually in a national park in Scotland this past September in the Cairngorms National Park. And sorry, I didn't think about doing anything while I was there for the Traveler. And then a few years ago, I was also in a national park in Portugal. And again, I was remiss in sort of covering that as something people might be interested in. But duly noted, going forward, I'm not going to miss another opportunity, because those places were really special, and it was fun to see them and hike through them and experience just a different part of the country. Um, in beautiful places that are so reminiscent of the treasure that we have here.
And it's interesting also to see how they're managed differently from the U.S. national parks. I know one thing that some readers continually bring up in the Traveler on the website is, why don't we charge international tourists more than domestic tourists? I mean, after all, an American citizen, their taxes go to help support the national parks, and then they're charged an entrance fee to get into a national park, roughly a third of the national parks, I think 103, so maybe a quarter of the national parks have entrance fees. And so the cry keeps coming up, well, why don't we charge international tourists more if our parks are in such dire financial straits? And I haven't really traveled too far abroad to national parks. Belize, I don't think there was much of a fee. I know Canada charges a little bit more, but there are some national parks, I believe, in Africa, in Kenya, where you might be charged $100 if you're not a citizen from that country.
Yeah, that's a tough question, and who knows how that will resolve, but I've heard that also.
You know, one country that is increasing its park fee, and I should have thought about this right off the top of my head, Ecuador, the Galapagos. My wife and I went to the Galapagos a year ago. Fantastic place. If you ever get the chance, it is a trip of a lifetime. The wildlife there, the snorkeling, the marine life. I mean, it's everything you hear about it. The animals seem tame because they've never had any threats from from human visitors. But when we went a year ago, I think it was $100 a person to get into the Galapagos National Park, and I think just recently they've increased it to $200 per person. And because there's a need for it, it's just such a sensitive, unique landscape that it costs a lot of money to keep it pristine, and it's an ongoing challenge. And as people familiar with the U.S. National Park System know, you can never have enough money to maintain these places.
That's true. What's the prospect for park visitation this summer? Have you heard anything? Are we expecting record crowds over last year, or have things kind of settled down a little bit?
You know, I think things have settled down a little bit. And the reason I say that is, earlier this year, I saw something enter my inbox in my email that I can't ever recall seeing. It was emails from concessionaires saying, hey, there's plenty of room in the inn this summer in places like Yellowstone, which normally, is so hard to find a room. And so that kind of suggests to me that for one reason or another, people are dialing back their national park adventures. And I guess it could be because of the price of gas. I know it's edged up towards $4 a gallon here in Utah. It's probably higher. Is it higher in Texas?
I don't think it's higher than that. I really can't say, but maybe it's because, we're able to travel abroad again freely. And that, you know, means we can go other places other than the national parks. So, that might explain part of it too.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's hard to say, and it's definitely going to be interesting to see what transpires this summer because there are, it seems, more and more parks that have timed entry reservations, and if you don't have a ticket, you can't get in. And that's always an interesting dilemma. Timed entry reservations, and there's only about 5 or 6 parks I think that have them. Yellowstone does not, but Glacier, Rocky Mountain, at Zion National Park, you need a permit to hike Angel's Landing. We're seeing Yosemite has timed entry this summer. And what's really interesting about those is that if you show up before 7 a.m. in the morning or after 3 p.m. in the afternoon, you don't need one of those timed entry reservation passes. And so does that mean that more people are going to get up a little bit earlier in the morning and try and get through the gate before that 7 o'clock witching hour arrives?
Possibly.
I know I always like to, because the morning is some of the best time in the national parks. It's nice and cool. You've got that beautiful light for photography. So I don't know. It's ever evolving. You don't hear a lot from National Park headquarters, National Park Service headquarters, in terms of whether they want all national parks to move to timed entry or not. I think uniform would make it easier for people to plan, other than being surprised. I know one of my writers mentioned the other day that I guess at Carlsbad Caverns National Park in far south New Mexico, you need a timed entry reservation to go on the cave tour, as opposed to being able to just walk up and get your pass. And so, if you're visiting national parks this summer, folks, be sure you go to the park website of your choice to see whether or not you need a permit for this or an advance reservation for that.
That's good advice because we are actually going to Yosemite this summer, and I hadn't thought about the timed entry thing. So I will give you a full report on how that plays out.
Well, do you have a reservation in a lodge there already?
Yes.
So there you go. That's all you need.
Okay. Well,
That'll
good to
let you
know.
in. Yeah, it's like at Glacier National Park. If you're staying at one of the park lodges, that effectively is your entrance pass to the park. But anyway, I'm looking forward. One thing that I've said in the past, and I'll say it now, and I'll say it in the future, is there are so many wonderful destinations in the park system that are off the beaten path that you can go visit and have a wonderful park experience without the crowds. Places like Cumberland Gap National Historical Park in pick your state, Tennessee, Virginia, or Kentucky. And you've been there, Lynn. You did a podcast from there.
Yeah, that's right. That's an interesting place. That's something that you can do in a few hours, kind of on your way from one place to another. Um, there's a great hike that takes you up there, and you can stand on the corner of Virginia, Kentucky, and Tennessee and have a great overlook. And then there's another place where you can see an overlook of the gap itself. So there was a lot of history to learn about on that trip, and some of our folks that were making their way out west found an easy passage through the Appalachian Mountains, and that really allowed for lots and lots of people to go out and find their fortunes out west.
And Daniel Boone, the Commonwealth of Virginia back in the 1770s, actually hired him to blaze that path, which was known as the Wilderness Road. And that was kind of like the break in the dike that let all the swarms of people go through. And I guess that's progress. I don't know. But they encountered, they took over Kentucky and slowly moved west. But yeah, that was a natural gap that I think a lot of wildlife used. And of course, a lot of Native American cultures would traverse it back and forth. But that's just, one place. Tallgrass Prairie National Preserve in Kansas. I've spoken often about that unit of the national park system, and there are some interesting southwestern units in the national park system that I want to go explore further that have old Spanish missions and cliff dwellings, and there's just so much rich history that I don't think you could have enough time to visit all these interesting places and spend the time to soak up the history. And as you know, the superintendent of Scotts Bluff National Monument once told me, we may not be a final destination, but we can be a destination on your way to that final destination.
There you go. Well, anything interesting happening in the parks? I know there's been a death in Rocky Mountain National Park. What else is going on?
Yeah, there have been some unfortunate situations in the parks recently. As you mentioned, there was a death in Rocky Mountain National Park. A young man from Colorado Springs, just 23 years old, set out last weekend, the 11th and 12th, to hike Long's Peak, the tallest point in Rocky Mountain National Park that goes up to, I think it's 14,259 feet. And it's still winter up there. And supposedly on Sunday, the 12th of May, apparently he summited because he texted a friend of his and said, "I'm on the summit." And that was the last they heard from him. And after 4 days of searching, unfortunately, they found his body down at the bottom of one of the glaciers there. And as the park press release said, it was evident that he had taken a significant fall, which was pretty unfortunate. What else is going on in the parks? There was a death at Grand Canyon National Park, and this was kind of a strange one. This 58-year-old gentleman from New Mexico, for some reason, thought he could raft down the Colorado River through the national park on a raft comprised of 3 or 4 planks of wood.
Oh.
Tied together. And he actually took his 25-pound corgi with him. And his body was found just at River Mile 6, I think it was. So he didn't make it too far, and there's been no sign of his dog. Hopefully his dog survived, but it's very, very strange situation. And sometimes you really have to wonder about what people are thinking when they go into the national parks. They're not city parks. They're not tame. There's a lot of dangers that nature will throw at you.
I was really surprised to learn last year when I was speaking with the superintendent of Big Bend National Park that they have 4 or 5 or 6 deaths every year there. It's so harsh and it's so hot. And some of these hikes, if you don't do them early in the morning and you're there in the summer, the temperatures can just really soar. And if you are not prepared with water or the right, attire, it can be really a struggle. And of course, there are a lot of trails that have quite a bit of elevation too. And so it was surprising. It was surprising to me because, we hear about deaths in the national parks, but it was surprising to me to learn that there were so many per year expected, really. So be careful out there.
There's that old saying there, but for the grace of God go I. And I can probably think back to some of my younger days and some of the things I've done in national parks. I know I've hiked from the south rim of the Grand Canyon down to Phantom Ranch and had a nice iced lemonade, and then hiked back up to the south rim all in the same day, which they urge you not to try and do that.
And
you know, I,
how old were you when you did this?
um, you know,
Because that's quite a
I was probably in my mid 40s, 43, 44. I was a young, strong buck. And the problem is, I still think I'm a young, strong buck, and that was 24 years ago. But I've canoed on rivers, I've kayaked on lakes, and yeah, you never know what nature's going to throw at you, and in places like Big Bend and Death Valley, you can never take enough water. I mean, just like Big Bend at Death Valley, people, I don't know what they think when they go out with just a quart of water, and they find their bodies later. It's unfortunate, but not just what are they thinking when they're out hiking or paddling or whatnot. There have been a couple of instances in recent weeks that just make you think, what are these people thinking? There was a situation at Lake Mead National Recreation Area maybe a month ago where these two guys started pushing over these billion-year-old rock little formations in the national park. And if that wasn't bizarre enough, somebody fortunately caught them on camera, and the park has the videotape of these two gentlemen doing this. And I guess gentleman is too kind of a word to use for them to go into a national park and destroy natural resources like that. And in the background on this video, apparently the one guy's daughter could be heard, "Daddy, don't get hurt," or something like that.
Whoa.
Yeah, crazy. And then at Canyonlands National Park in the great state of Utah, there was an incident back in March that just came to light because law enforcement rangers are asking for the public's health. But if you've ever been to the Needles district of Canyonlands, there's some alcoves there. And one of them is known as Cave Springs Cowboy Camp. And it's under this alcove, and it dates back to the cowboying days before the park was established. And rather than build a cabin while they were watching the cattle, spending the summer months there, they would use these alcoves for housing because it had a ceiling to keep them dry. And there these artifacts there, some tables that these cowboys had made, and there were some harnesses from their horses and whatnot. And all these are on display there to let today's visitors know what it was like back in the ranching days in that part of the country. And apparently, this couple decided that they didn't need to stay behind the closed area sign, and they went in and they were picking up some of the artifacts, and the woman was sitting in one of the cowboy chairs, which looked pretty fragile. And what they didn't realize was there was a trail camera that captured their behavior. And so the Park Service released that the other day with hopes that somebody who knows that couple or saw them would alert authorities as to who they were, because apparently there were some artifacts that were taken. So you have to wonder, I mean, these are beautiful places that were, as they say, take only pictures and leave only footprints, and some people don't think that applies to them.
And that's unfortunate. But I just have hope that we continue to get smarter as a society and appreciate and protect the resources that we have.
Yeah, because they're not making them anymore. It's springtime in the Rockies, as the saying goes, and you can tell it's springtime because first Yellowstone and Grand Teton come out with their warnings that the grizzly bears have come out of their dens, and they follow that one up a week or so later with, "Be careful, the elk are calving," and mama elk don't like it when you get too close to their calves, and especially at Yellowstone at Mammoth Hot Springs, the park headquarters. The elk like to calve there, and I guess it's because of all the green lawns that surround the housing there.
Yes, I've seen them. I've seen the elk kind of stretched out in the lawns before. Yeah, that nice cool green grass.
And it seems like never a spring goes by when somebody doesn't run into problems with an elk. And bison. I think there was already a bison incident in Yellowstone. So yeah, if you're enjoying a spring outing in the national parks that have wildlife, pay attention to your surroundings and listen to what the park rangers have to say about keeping your distance.
So what else is going on? There's some concession news. Is that correct?
Ongoing concession news. Aramark is one of the larger concessionaires across the park system. They operate in a number of parks, and one park where they no longer operate is Crater Lake National Park in Oregon. And when the Park Service contracts with these companies to run the concessions, the dining concessions, the lodging concessions, there's a formal contract and expectations that are to be met. in that contract, not only in terms of providing good meals and comfortable rooms, but maintenance, safety, security, and at Crater Lake, things were so bad apparently that one of the U.S. senators from Oregon wrote to Chuck Sams, the director of the National Park Service, complaining about the situation there. And there was a Park Service investigation. Each year, a park will grade its concessionaire on how they performed during that year. And the performance review for Crater Lake was not very good. And so the Park Service actually yanked the contract and awarded it to another up-and-coming concessions company, Explore US, I believe it's called. And then there was a report the other day that another Aramark subsidiary that was running the concessions at Yosemite National Park had run into some problems, and the Park Service didn't yank the contract, but they kind of let them know that these things can't go on. And I think there was a park visitor who was injured by some of the situations in one of the lodges there, and maybe a park employee or concessions employee received injuries too. Also received injuries in Yosemite, and so those are concerning situations. And here at the Traveler, we're going to try and take a broader look across the entire national park system about how concessions are going, and are these unique situations, or are there more reports across the country where concessions operations are falling a little less than would be hoped for.
Yeah, it's such an important issue because, everyone who travels to the national parks relies on the concessions for food and housing, and lodging. And so it's a huge thing that it's just a huge issue that we should be aware of and on top of, and paying attention to, because it matters to all of us.
And it's a huge responsibility that we entrust the concessionaires to live up to. And especially when you see room rates going hundreds of dollars per night, $300, $400. I know there are some rooms, $500, $600 a night, that you would expect the experience to live up to what you're paying for. And granted, some of these lodges are 100 years old, maybe a little bit older than that, and they require some TLC throughout the years to maintain them. But if the concessionaire wants to take on that job, they're expected to, like I said, live up to the contract. And so we're going to try and take a look across the country and see, as I said, whether the Crater Lake and the Yosemite situations are unique and one-offs, or if there is a growing problem across the park system. Just because there is a lot of old buildings out there that need to be properly maintained. And I think one of the problems that the concessionaires run into is having an employee workforce.
Right, right.
I mean, employee housing isn't the best, and pay may not be the best either. So do you go each year with 100% turnover, or do you have a lot of repeat? It's a tough industry, I'm sure.
Sure, yeah. And some of the parks that have very difficult access have a hard time recruiting employees too, because they're required to stay so far away from family and friends sometimes.
Yeah, well, I know as a teenager growing up, if I was aware of a concessions job during my summer vacation, I might have taken it.
Me too.
And then there was interesting news from Zion National Park just the other day. Xanterra Parks and Resorts is one of the oldest concessionaires in the park system. They've long been in Yellowstone, in Grand Canyon, in Zion, Crater Lake, and other parks. At Zion, for I think 52 years, Xanterra Parks and Resorts, also known by previous names, was the concessionaire of the Zion Lodge. And they just lost that contract beginning in January of 2025. A company more familiar in ski circles, the ski industry, has been chosen to run the concessions at Zion National Park, Zion Lodge. which that really kind of surprised me. It's actually a Park City, Utah company, Powder Corp. Um, they got the contract to run the concessions in Zion, so it'll be interesting to see how they do.
Do you know what the difference was? Why they were chosen, selected rather?
No, I don't. Those things are kept close to the vest by the Park Service, dollar wise, as well as, what did this concessionaire propose that it would do differently than has been done. I think Powder Corp weighed in on more sustainability and some different programs for tourists, for visitors to the park. It's going to be interesting to see, and I'm hoping to sit down with the CEO from Powder Corp in the coming weeks to find out exactly what they plan to do. And one thing I just discovered when this Zion contract news came out, apparently Powder Corp also won the concessions at Stovepipe Wells in Death Valley National Park. That was a release that I never saw, but it'll be interesting to see, what are they doing at Stovepipe Wells, and what do people see? I mean, it's nice to see new blood in concession circles, but coming from the ski industry to national park lodging and dining, is there a corollary? Does it blend well, or is it going to be a brand new learning experience that the visitors are going to pay for,
Yeah, it'll be interesting to
figuratively
see.
and literally? So it's always exciting what's going on across the national park system, and I don't know about you, Lynn, but I'm anxious to get out there. It's been a long winter, not as long as last winter when we had 10 feet of snow piled up in my backyard, but it's always good to get out. And my wife and I are planning to escape to Grand Teton for a couple days in June to get some kayaking in. What about you? You mentioned going to Yosemite. When's that coming up?
Well, July. So I know it's not an ideal time to travel, but I had been there before in April a few years ago, and my husband hadn't been to Yosemite and he wanted to go. So this was just a good time that worked for us. So it'll be different to see it that time of year. There were some places that we weren't able to see in April because they were still snowed over. So
Sure.
I'll get to see some of that this time around. But it was such a great experience. It's always I came away, I'm like, "What took me so long to get here? This place is fantastic." Just to come through that tunnel and see that view of everything that is Yosemite and a photograph that you've seen so many times of, El Capitan and Half Dome and Bridal Veil Falls. It was just stunning. It was just so unforgettable and just being able to walk around and do the hikes and the trails and see the falls. And so I know it'll be a little bit different, but it's still going to be good.
Yeah, I'm sure it will be. I think, at least for me, I tend to find myself going back to the same places: the Yellowstones, the Grand Tetons, Arches, Bryce Canyon, and have to keep reminding myself that there are 400 and almost 30 other units of the park system to go explore, and that's why I like getting out on the road and going to some of these off the beaten path gems. I mean, they might be small; it might only be a half a day visit, but there's always something interesting and fantastic to discover out there.
Yeah, and I was in New York City in March, and I went by the African American Burial Grounds National Historical Site. I think that's what it's called. The facility was closed, but it was kind of interesting just to walk by. It was very small. I would have liked to have learned more, but that's something that you can do when you're in New York City. You just kind of walk down there and go by it and see what it's all about, and just learn a little bit more about the history that our national historical parks offer.
Right, right. And some things that folks in the West should be aware of for this summer: climate change impacts. Canada has already kicked off its summer fire season, wildfires, and I understand they're churning a lot of smoke into some of the northern tier states. Unfortunately, I haven't seen an outlook for the western U.S. in terms of fire this summer. Hopefully, it won't be too bad. Um, Back east, of course, we're seeing stronger and stronger storms. At Cape Hatteras National Seashore in North Carolina, a combination of more potent storms as well as just how barrier islands move about. As we've reported over the past couple of years, a few houses have fallen into the Atlantic by Rodanthe. And just the other day, the National Seashore put out a warning or advisory for people to avoid the Ocean Drive area of Rodanthe, because not only do you have some of the debris from houses falling in there, but sewer lines, septic systems are being uprooted, and other utility lines, and it's causing hazardous situations, which is unfortunate. Some of our writers are planning to head out across the national park system, and one writer is looking forward to visiting Cape Hatteras for a couple stories. One, Cape Hatteras Lighthouse is undergoing a massive restoration this summer, and I guess they've got scaffolding going all the way up to the top, and she's anxious to go down there and learn about that process. And
Sure. It wasn't that long ago, well, probably 20 years now, that they actually moved the lighthouse away from the eroding shoreline a little
right.
further in. So, they're paying attention to that historical lighthouse. So that's good to know.
Yeah. And another story at Cape Hatteras that I'm really interested to see how it turns out. They've got some horses at Cape Hatteras, banker ponies, whether you want to call them wild horses or feral horses. There's a small herd there. I don't know how many, but it is relatively small. And the Park Service is looking into its management plan for the horses and how they should be managed going forward. And it's a hot button issue, as people familiar with Theodore Roosevelt National Park in North Dakota or Cumberland Island National Seashore in Georgia well know. In Theodore Roosevelt, there was the proposal to maybe we get rid of the horses because they're not native. And there was a huge outcry pushing back against that, and the Park Service eventually dropped that proposal. At Cumberland Island, where Park Service studies have indicated the adverse impacts that the wild horses there, the feral horses there, are having on the landscape, on the dune systems, and even on some threatened and endangered species. The Park Service is being sued to remove the horses. Cape Lookout National Seashore has some wild horses, feral horses. As I mentioned, Cape Hatteras does. You go up the shoreline to Assateague Islands, and the horses there.
And Chincoteague Island National Seashore, and I believe the Park Service does a magnificent job of managing those wild horses there and have for years. So, curious to know what the Park Service can learn about those successfully managed wild horse areas.
Well, but then there's the whole question of, should they be managing them? Are they invasive species that should be removed? I mean, I've read papers that say the genetics of the horses found at Theodore Roosevelt and Cape Hatteras, and I'm sure the other national seashores, they're not native horses. They're not descended from 10,000 years ago. They don't even have pure Spanish bloodlines in them, from when the Spanish explorers came over. As one individual who knows told me, they're mutts. So should the Park Service maintain these herds, and why should one park maintain them while the other park says they're not native? We got to get rid of them. It's a real thorny question, and it comes down to horse lovers and horse haters.
Well, it'll be interesting to see, how those issues are resolved going forward.
It really will be, and I don't envy the park managers. They're caught between a rock and a hard place. Some of the other stories we're looking at diversity in the national park system ranks. We're going to be looking at climate change impacts on some of the iconic trees found in the national park system, the bristlecone pines, the white bark pines, and not just only how climate change is impacting those species, but if those species fail, what other species are going to be impacted by them. Grizzly bears rely on white bark pine nuts as a key source of protein in the fall when they're getting ready to go into hibernation. Clark's nutcrackers, pine squirrels, pinion jays. So we're going to be looking at those stories. Of course, Point Reyes National Seashore, it's not a horse problem there. It's a elk problem and a livestock problem. The Park Service is proposing to take down a fence line that has kind of separated the Tule elk in one part of this national seashore from cattle herds. And so it's going to be interesting to see what that decision comes down to. So, Lynn, as you well know, there is never a dearth of stories across the national park system to look into.
That's right. Well, I'd like to share an interview that I have coming up for a podcast. I'm going to be talking with Brett Seymour, who is an underwater photographer with the Submerged Resources Center. And so I'm really looking forward to talking to him because, there's so many limitations to underwater photography, and they have so many challenges. And what's really interesting is that the national parks, I think there are 100 national parks that have a total of 2.5 million acres of underwater resources. So, Brett Seymour, part of his job is to go down there and take photographs and inventory and document all these archaeological sites. And so it sounds like a really interesting job. You and I have both talked to folks in the Submerged Resources Center before, and that sounds like another job that we might have picked had we known about it when we were younger. Um,
So Rebecca Latson, our contributing photographer, recently traveled to South Dakota, and one of the stops she made along the way was Minuteman Missile National Historic Site, which tells a story of nuclear war. Hopefully it never comes to that, but the missile silos across the West, and she had a picture of one of the mock-ups of the missile silo, the little underground room where the missileers, as they're called, sit and have the key to unleash the end of the world. And back during my AP days, I actually went into an active peacekeeper missile silo in Wyoming. So, as you well know, Lynn, as journalists, we frequently can walk in any profession we want. And so, I hope you ask Brett if you can go diving with him sometime.
okay, I will. I'm a certified PADI diver. So, yeah, that would be a great assignment.
It would be incredible. People talk about the skies overhead, the park system as the other half of the park system. Well, maybe that's the other third of the park system because, as you mentioned, there are so many underwater resources in the park system that I think we all forget exist down there. Isle Royale National Park apparently has an incredible collection of sea wrecks. And Brett was telling me what makes them so unique is the water is so cold that nothing grows on them. And so they're so very well preserved.
And crystal clear water.
And crystal clear water and really, really cold water. And I don't know if I'd want to go diving there.
You just have to have the right equipment, and it's
I
a piece of
guess.
cake, right?
Yeah.
But
piece of
he
cake.
said he's getting ready to go to Isle Royale in Lake Superior, and then also Alaska, and then some of the other places that he's photographed in Acadia and Biscayne and Glacier Bay, Glacier National Park, Lake Mead, all kinds of places with all kinds of things down below the surface of the water. So.
It's a horrible job. So many things that we weren't aware of when we started going to school. Well, Lynn, it's been great catching up. It's great to know that the traveler is going to continue because I really enjoy bringing these stories to life and working with all the writers and broadcasters as yourself to reveal some insights into these places because they really are incredible places that more people should know about, and not just to explore them, but to take heart in knowing that they exist and opening their voices to let Congress know that we really need to take the best of care possible of them.
You're right. And you do a great job. Your passion always shows. You have a great team of folks that contribute articles and photography. And so we want to keep it going. So thank you, Kurt, for all you do. And thank you, listeners, for giving us some time today.
That's our show for this week. We hope you enjoyed it. Here at The Traveler, we'd like to extend our thanks again to all the readers and listeners who donated to keep the news organization alive. We wouldn't be here without your support. Next week, Lynn will be talking with Brett Seymour, the National Park Service's underwater photographer, about all the incredible underwater spots in the National Park System. I know I can't wait to listen to that episode. For The Traveler, this is Kurt Repanshek. See you in the parks.
The composers and musicians at Orange Tree Productions have created a unique collection known as the National Park Series that has grown to include more than 30 CD titles. Composed against the backdrop of a park's sounds of nature, these musical scores will connect you with these beautiful places and take you there, at least in your mind. This collection is the #1 selling National Park audio series in the world and provides the background music for National Parks Travelers podcasts. Visit them at orangetreeproductions.com. Editing and production work for the National Parks Traveler podcast is done by Splitbeard Productions. You can learn more about us at splitbeardproductions.com. National Parks Traveler is a 501c3 nonprofit media organization that provides daily editorial coverage of national parks and protected areas. Traveler's coverage is made possible by reader and listener donations. Visit us at nationalparkstraveler.org.